Hey everybody, welcome back to FM. We are going to start our new NC Turbo installation series where we're going to install this turbo in this car. We're going to go over the components of the kit, we're going to go over the tools that you're going to need, and we're going to start the disassembly process. So stay tuned. All right, now let's go over the components of our kit. Starting over here with the most important piece, we have our turbo. We also have our coated cast iron pieces, our manifold and our outlet casting. We have the turbo hardware. We have a miscellaneous kit, includes zip ties, O-rings, things you may need as you go. We have our washer reservoir relocation kit, new fuel injectors. We have our oil supply kit, oil drain kit for the turbo. We have our FM downpipe top kit for adapting the cat to the outlet casting. Our new cap brace. We include a new gasket since yours is likely old and crusty at this point. We have a vacuum bag kit. We have a kit for relocating your evaporative emission solenoid, depending on what style you have. We include all the pieces you need. We have a battery box for relocating your battery. Power steering relocation kit as well. We have a new airbox with lid and filter, and all the supporting gasket and hardware. Now we have our turbo water supply and return kit. We have a custom formed silicone heater core hose. We have a new intercooler, hardware and bracket. We have our custom formed silicone intercooler hoses. We have these 3D printed bulkhead plates for where those intercooler hoses pass through the front bulkhead. New MAF tube for mounting the MAF. Bypass valve. New map sensor and retention bracket, and turbo blanket. Now this one is a used prototype. Yours will look a lot nicer than this one. So that goes over the components of the kit. Now depending on when you receive your kit, your components may vary slightly. So one thing you don't see here on the table is our tuning software. Now we're using Versatune, and we will show you how to use Versatune and how to load your map and use the cable that's provided later on in this video series. Now before we dig into our disassembly, I'm going to go over all the tools and the supplies that are needed for this installation. So I'm going to start over here with a lot of the tools that most home mechanics should already have, and you'll definitely want before starting this job. So that's going to include all your metric sockets, your wrenches, your screwdrivers, Phillips and flathead. Now with our sockets and drivers, you can see I have a variety here. So I have some that are powered, some that are hand operated. We have extensions. This is a 3/8 socket set, shallow and deep sockets. You may also want a quarter drive. Full assortment of wrenches here, both open-ended and gear can be helpful. Got my Allen keys and some screwdrivers that represent maybe a larger set. You may want a variety of these. We also have some pliers, also just an assortment here, some needle nose, some that are bent. Now, we also have some specialty tools. Maybe a little less common. So we have an O2 sensor removal tool. Yours may look more like a socket. Spark plug socket. Now we do need a chrome 24mm socket because it does have a thinner wall than the impact grade socket shown here. So we need that for the oil pressure sensor. We also have a 24mm Allen tool. Now it's a bit specialty, so you may have to source this separate. And we have a T25 Torx. When we go to put everything together, we'll want to get everything tightened properly, so we do have a torque wrench. Then over here we also have some devices for cutting, so we have hose cutters, a razor blade, and a little pair of side cuts. Now to go on the cutting trend, we also need to cut a hole in the bulkhead panel. For that we need a 3-inch hole saw. So hole saw with the driver piece here, and we'll need the drill to power that. Continuing on the cutting theme, we have a die grinder here with a cutoff wheel. Now this one's pneumatic. You can use an electric one if you wish. And to clean up the cut, we have a deburring tool. Not necessary, you could always use a file instead of this, but this makes the job a lot easier. Not shown, something similar to this, is you'll want a precise cutting tool, either an oscillating saw or a Dremel, because there will be some plastic trimming that we'll need to do. Now we're going to kind of get over to our supplies. So assortment of supplies here. We have some masking tape with a Sharpie. We have our funnel. Now we're also going to need drain pans because we're going to drain both our oil and our coolant. so we'll want to be able to catch those fluids. Towels for messes. We have penetrating oil, or WD-40, for stubborn bolts. We have cleaning fluid, brake fluid, solvent cleaner. Blue Loctite. Now starting over here, we have anti-seize, Teflon thread paste. We do not recommend tape. And this is a silicone-based lubricant for O-rings. Now we'll go over our safety equipment. We have safety glasses. You'll want ear protection. Gloves, especially when you're dealing with the turbo blanket, it can make your hands a little itchy, being fiberglass. And we'll want to be able to organize all of the hardware we take off, so we have a hardware bin here. And a flashlight always helps. That's everything you see here. There's a few more things I need to list that aren't quite visible. So you'll need a way to lift the vehicle. You can either use a lift if you're so lucky. If not, you'll be doing this job probably with jack and jack stands. Now, we mentioned draining fluids. You're going to need a new oil filter, fresh oil, and if you're not planning on reusing your coolant, you'll need some fresh coolant. If you are planning on reusing your cat as opposed to buying the pre-done cat from us, you will need a welder. And for the tuning portion, you will need a laptop with Windows installed. Now, before we begin the installation, I do want to say that as you take things off of the car, to keep those components organized and labeled, especially with its hardware, as many of those things will end up back on the car, and in some cases you'll need to reuse the stock hardware in the location you removed it from. With that said, the first step in our installation is to remove the hood. Now, this is a recommended step. It's not required, but it will make access to various things later on in the installation much easier. So to remove the hood, we need a 12mm socket. We're going to crack loose the top 2 bolts, 1 on each hinge, and remove the bottom 2 bolts, 1 on each hinge. It is a good idea to have a helper have you remove the hood, as it is a little bit cumbersome. So with that said, we'll get going. Our next step is to relieve the fuel pressure. So we're going to find our underhood fuse box and we're going to remove the fuel pump fuse. And it's the 15 amp. And I'm going to leave the fuse box lid off the car to prevent it from getting scratched. Now, we've already done this off camera, but the next step is to hop into the car and attempt to start the car. That will alleviate any remaining fuel pressure in the system. All right, now that we've run the car to purge any fuel pressure, we want to keep that pressure from building back up. So we're going to crack our fuel cap. We can leave it in place. We just want to be able to have any pressure vent out if any were to build. Now the next step in the process is to get the car lifted and have the front wheels removed. So we already have our car on a lift, so we are now going to remove the front wheels. Now I'm just breaking the lug nuts loose for now. Once I get the car elevated, I'll remove the lug nuts the rest of the way. Now we're going to disconnect our battery using a 10mm socket. First, we got to remove the cover if it still is equipped. A lot of them are broken off these days. There's tabs on either side that just need to be popped loose. And we'll set this aside. Now we'll disconnect our ground. All right, our next step is to remove the sound tube and some of the components attached, like the PCV hose and the evaporative emission solenoid. So I'm going to start with the sound tube, which requires a 10mm socket. So the evaporative emissions bracket just pulls up. We'll use a pair of needle nose pliers to unclip the harness. Unplug the connector. Now we'll remove this bolt, which requires an 8mm socket. We'll let the solenoid float for now. We won't need the bracket, but we will need to reuse the bolt. Now we got most of the sound tube loosened up. There is a plastic clip that holds the sound tube down to a bracket. So using a little flat blade screwdriver, we're going to open up that clip. Now we should be able to remove our sound tube. Now we will not be reinstalling the sound tube, so we can also remove these couple brackets that are specific to it using a 10mm socket. And next we'll remove the PCV hose. We'll use either a 5/8 quick disconnect tool or a small flat blade screwdriver. The goal here is just to get these little green or blue plastic clips undone. So in this case, I pushed in on both of the green spades to allow the outer piece out. The other option is you can push out on the outer spades to have it go over this collar. In either case, we do want to keep the green clip with the connector. Now we'll do the same on the other side. Now we don't need this hose, but we do need these ends later on. Now, if you have an NC1, your evaporative emission solenoid is going to look different than what you see here. Now, it mounts in a similar fashion, but it mounts to the throttle body inlet hose. So you're going to want to disconnect the electrical, and this bracket will pull up and out of the throttle body hose. You'll want to leave the solenoid in place, and the bracket can be set aside. Now our next step is to remove the airbox and intake assembly. So we're going to start by disconnecting the MAF and its electrical clip here. We can then unclip the airbox and disconnect the throttle body inlet at the throttle body. And then we can remove this as one piece. All right, so we unplug this. Now using angled pliers, we'll unclip this plug. Set that aside. About up the throttle body. We'll set this aside for now. We will need the MAF later on. So now we're going to remove the lower portion of the airbox. To do so, we're going to take off these two nuts using a 10mm socket. And the lower portion is just secured via a peg into a grommet. So we're going to grab this flange, pull it straight up. Once we have that done, we can remove the lower portion of the airbox. Okay, our next step is to unbolt the power steering reservoir, and we will just leave it in place. We'll need a 10mm socket. Now we're going to remove our battery and battery tray. So we're going to disconnect our power terminal first, 10mm wrench, take the upper bracket off with a 10mm socket, and then we will remove the tray. Set this aside. So we want to take off our battery box wall. Now we do have two harnesses clipped to it. So we're going to use some pliers to unclip those harnesses. Now to remove the wall section, we just got to pull firmly straight up. Now we're going to remove the 4 bolts of the lower tray, and once we're able to maneuver that tray up, that will help us unclip the remaining harness from it. All right, our next step is to temporarily remove our washer reservoir. So we're going to need to unplug the electrical connection, the hose connection, and unclip a various number of things from it. So we'll start with the electrical. So we've unplugged it. Now we're going to undo our couple hose clips over here. We're going to unplug our line at this elbow. Pull it out of this clip. Now we're going to undo our harness connection, remove our AC line, and then we'll unbolt the tank. And this requires a 10mm socket. Now as you stow this tank on a bench, make sure that your line stays above the level of the fluid or it'll leak all over. Also make sure nothing leaks out of the cap or it'll make a big mess. The next step is to remove our wiper cowl. Now there's a few steps involved here. First, we need to remove these trim caps and remove the screws beneath. There's 1 per side. We will then remove our wiper arms. We'll then remove this weather stripping from the leading edge, and then we should be able to pull our cowl panel off. So if you still have the original caps, there's a good likelihood that they will break. That's why we include 2 new ones in our kit. But just use a little screwdriver, carefully pry, pop them out of place. I'll pop off the wiper arm cap. To remove the wiper arm, we use a 14mm socket. All right, now to get this weather stripping off, it's a little tedious. There are tiny little plastic spade clips that attach it all the way across. So using a small pair of pliers, we want to pinch the spade, or sometimes you can get it with your fingertips. Pinch the spade to where it releases from the hole. And then the one on this end, kind of have to lift up a little bit on the plastic. Set this to the side, and now our cowl panel can be removed. It removes by slightly pulling it forward. And then it has a seam here where it can kind of fold a little bit. We can set this to the side. Now our next major component we want to remove is the center firewall panel. To be able to get it out of the way, we want to first remove the shock tower brace, if equipped. Then we also need to loosen the heater core and AC lines, pull them up and out of the way a little bit, and then we can remove the hardware and remove this center cowl panel. But first, I'll pull the decorative engine cover. Now, depending on the year of your car, you'll either have 14mm or 12mm nuts. This one has 14. So we're going to remove all the shock tower components. All right, now we're going to start with our AC line. We got to remove this plastic clip into this far nut first. Not uncommon for those to break. So now we can move the line up and out of the way a little bit so we have access to the nuts that hold the heater core line. And I like to rotate this up and away, that way it doesn't rub on the firewall. Now we can pull the heater core line up. Now we're going to remove the 2 bolts per side on the firewall. There are also 4 bolts holding this panel in from the cowl. Put the other 4 from the other side. With all the hardware removed, we can once again manipulate our lines a little bit and carefully pull out the panel. And we'll set it aside. All right, to get started, we're going to remove our forward fender liners and our center splash pan. Now on our forward fender liners, we just need to remove the clips from inside the fender and from across the bottom, as well as a few screws. And for the screws underneath, we'll use an 8mm socket. Now on the splash pan, we also have some bolts that use a 10mm socket. Now this particular car is missing a couple. So we do have one here. We should have one here. Normally there's a clip up here. So we'll go ahead and get things removed. Got to disconnect our ABS wire. It's just a little pinch clip. So I'll reach on the back side and pop it out. And we also have some screws on the front. And now to finish this other side. All right, now we're gonna drain some fluids. Now we need to end up draining the oil and the coolant. Now, depending on the condition of your fluid, you may want to save those fluids, so plan accordingly. In this case, we're going to just drain them and replace with new when we put things back together. Doesn't really matter the order. We're gonna go ahead and drain the oil first. So once we're mostly drained, we're gonna go ahead and put our drain plug back in for now. We'll remove this later on and replace it with a fitting. All right, now we will move on to our coolant. Now this could go on for quite a while. We've got what we need out of it, so we're gonna go ahead and put the plug in. All right, our next step is to remove our bumper cover, which will help us with the installation of our intercooler and intercooler piping later on. To remove our bumper cover, we need to unplug the electrical for fogs and side markers as equipped. And then we need to remove some hardware from the inside fenders, from the front grille here, and then up from the top. So we will start with removing our electrical and our fender bolts. So we'll undo our fog light and our side marker. Now we'll move on to our inner fender hardware. Now we want to remove a few extra fender clips as necessary to be able to pull our fender liner back. Now typically you're going to find 3 pieces of hardware back here. You're going to have a bolt, you're going to have 2 nuts. Now in this car, these 2 nuts are missing. So someone's been in here before. So we will remove the bolt. So once again, we'll do the fog. Once again, a stub right, the side marker. And the same thing where we're going to remove extra fender liner clips. Now we need to remove the hardware hidden behind the grille. Now NC1s, 2s, and 3s seem to all have slightly different grille covers, but they're all basically the same. They're all in the same location. So you just gotta find where the seam is. Typically there's a screwdriver relief, so you can get a screwdriver in there and carefully pop the panel out, and behind it, you'll see a bolt. For that bolt, we need a 10mm socket. We'll go ahead and pop this side off as well. All right, the last step in the bumper removal process is the top hardware. So there are 8 bolts across the top, so I will get those taken out now. Now we're able to remove the bumper cover. We'll go carefully set it aside. Now that we have the bumper cover removed, we have access to a few other things that need to go. First being the snorkel, and directly below it is a plastic tray that we'll also pull. So for the snorkel, we have 2 of these plastic rivets and 1 bolt that requires a 10mm socket. This will not be reused. All right, now we're to our tray here. The tray is held in with a number of the plastic rivets, and 2 of them are actually quite hidden. There's 1 underneath each headlight. Now to get to those, you will have to remove your headlights. Fairly easy to do. There's 1 plastic rivet up here, and then 4 bolts. Now, this plastic panel does go back in. We will have to wait until we install the intercooler and the intercooler hoses, and we will have to modify it first. But keep that in mind when it comes to your headlights. You may not want to put them all the way back in. With that said, let's get it removed. So this one is a little different in that it's threaded instead of just a quarter turn. Now using a 10mm socket, we will remove the headlight bolts. This customer has aftermarket headlights, which limit my ability to pull the light out further, but you can see our last clip in from the top. Knowing this has to come back off, I'm going to just put 1 bolt in at the top, loose. And now the other side. Now the panel can come out. And once again, we'll temporarily put the light back in place. Now back to the bottom side of the car, at the front here, if you have an ambient temperature sensor, it will interfere with the intercooler where it's located now. So we just need to take a moment to unclip it, both the sensor and its harness, and we're gonna just flip it to the other side. Now our next step is to remove our under chassis braces. We're gonna remove a total of 3 of them, starting with this first one that goes right underneath the oil pan. So we're using a 12mm socket. We're gonna remove 5 bolts. And we'll set this aside. Now we're gonna remove this brace. Now this brace has slotted ends on the driver's side, so we don't have to fully remove those bolts. If we leave them in place, it makes it easier to reinstall the brace later on. Then we'll remove these 2 bolts. And set the brace aside. Now, similar to the middle brace, there is one slotted hole on this one, which again will make it easier to reinstall if we leave that 1 bolt in place. So we'll just crack this one loose and remove the other 3. This car also looks like it's been bottomed out, so this bolt shouldn't be at an angle. So our next step is to remove the mid pipe. So I will need a 14mm socket for the front. I'm gonna remove the bracket off the PPF, so I'll need a 12mm socket. And normally I need a 14mm socket for the back, but this car has an aftermarket muffler, so I need a 17mm socket for that. And I'm gonna work from the front to the back, starting with the 14. Now I'm gonna just hand thread that guy in, which will just keep the exhaust in place while I remove the back end. I just don't want anything to fall. Now we're gonna remove this hanger arm that holds the center hanger rubber for the mid pipe. And flip it around so it comes underneath the PPF. Now on the back, we'll remove the mid pipe from the muffler. Carefully pull the gasket off, walk my way to the front. So now we'll take that stud out and take the mid pipe down. With the mid pipe out, we're getting ready to remove our manifold. Before we do that, we want to remove the oxygen sensors. So we're going to unplug them from their connectors and remove them from the manifold assembly. Now the connectors are directly below the alternator, and they're easiest to access from the passenger side wheel well. So starting with the rear sensor, which is just ahead of the manifold flange here, we will get that removed. And this will get reused, so we'll set it aside. The primary sensor is directly behind the alternator, so looking at it from the wheel well, we can see it here. So we'll reach an oxygen sensor removal tool in. Feels like it's loose. There it is. Well, it's loose. Again, we'll set this aside for reuse later. All right, now we need to move a few things out of our way before we can remove our cat, starting with the heater core hose that passes right over the top of it. So I have a little Rubbermaid Tupperware dish that's going to catch some of the coolant that still resides in those heater core lines, because of course it wouldn't drain all out. We also need some pliers. I like the ones with the little 90-degree end. So we're going to first remove this hose. Now we want to carefully break the bond between the heater core hose and the heater core fitting. Now this is aluminum, so we don't want to pinch hard because that could cause a leak. So I'm going to just take some pliers or channel locks and just gently grip, but try to break the bond. And then we should be able to pull. Well, we caught some of it. And now we'll disconnect our other end. We will not reuse this hose. So continuing on with removing the heater core hose, we're now focused on this metal pipe as it wraps around to the back of the head. So we'll remove this nut with a 10mm socket. So following the hard pipe, we see that it turns into a rubber hose here with a clamp. So we're going to remove this clamp and disconnect the hard pipe from the heater core hose and remove the hard pipe. We then need to follow this rubber hose down to where it connects to the lower radiator hose as it comes out of the back of the head. Now the lower radiator hose is actually a hard metal pipe at the base. Since it's hard to see on the car, we have this display head that allows us to show you exactly where that rubber hose ends up. So as that hard metal pipe comes over here, drops down, the rubber hose joins to this hose barb. So this is the lower radiator hose, hard line. So this is where we need to disconnect. Commonly, these rubber hoses are vulcanized pretty well to the pipes, so you may have to use a hose pick or screwdriver to break that bond. This can go away, we won't reuse it. So now this clamp that I'd moved down, I'm gonna now pull off so it's out of the way. And now I need to source that lower clamp. Pull that clamp off. Now we need to separate this hose from the pipe. Now, in similar fashion, it's fairly well bonded, so we may have to use our screwdriver again, but instead we're going to go down the inside of the pipe and work it between the hose and the barb. Now we will grab our hose and see if we can separate. Now we're going to work on removing our steam vent line. So we're going to start with the hard line where it attaches to the head. So we're going to remove the two bolts using a 13mm socket. Be careful of the PCV, as that's really easy to break and they don't sell replacement pieces. You have to buy a whole new valve cover. And yes, these are really long bolts to hold on a nice thin little flange. Okay. So our next spot is at the back of the head. So we're going to follow our hard line as it wraps around the back, and it dumps into this short section of rubber into the back of the head. Now we don't need to disconnect the hard line from the rubber. We're just going to disconnect the rubber from the back of the head. So using some needle nose pliers, slight angle can help. We'll disconnect this clamp and pull this hose off the barb. Twist to break the bond, and then you should be able to reach your hand back there and pull up. Okay, and it's off. So now we need to remove the other side of the line because we need to remove the line in its entirety. So follow the hard line, turns into rubber, follow it all the way up to the expansion tank. You'll go through this dip to the rear barb on the expansion tank, and that's where we will remove it. This whole thing can go away. Be careful because it will probably leak a little on you. All right, our next step is to remove the cat bracket that mounts on the bottom of the cat. So there's 2 nuts that secure the bracket to the cat and 1 bolt that secures the bracket to the block. Now, before we remove our cat bracket, we are going to want to scribe around the nuts that hold the bracket to the cat. The reason we want to do this is we want to ensure proper alignment of the cat to the mid pipe once we go back together. So I'm going to use a paint pen, or you can use a scribing tool. We just want to make marks that are permanent. And I'm going to go ahead and make a mark around each nut. And now I can remove it using a 14mm socket. To get to the block bolt, we'll use a couple long extensions and go from the wheel well. So now let's remove the nut that secures the motor mount bracket to the motor mount. So if we look at the motor mount here, it's the stud sticking up at the top that goes through the cast aluminum bracket. We're going to take that nut off. That will allow us to tilt the engine later on. We're using a 17mm wrench to break that nut loose. Okay. Now, one of our last steps before we go back up top is to remove a bolt that secures the brake line heat shield. And it's not really accessible from up top, so we have to get to it from the bottom. So we'll need a number of extensions to reach way up there. And we're removing the center bolt of that heat shield with a 10mm socket. All right, now we're going to finish removing the brake line heat shield. So we have 2 more fasteners, one at the very front, one at the very back. Now the one at the very front seems like it'd be better to get to from the bottom, but the alternator cooling duct is in the way. So you need a 10mm gear wrench. And if you come into it from the front, you can see the end of the bolt here. So the bolt head is underneath, and we're going to break it loose and remove it. It's not a fun one to get to. Now our last fastener is at the back. It's a nut on a stud on the firewall. Again, a 10mm gear wrench is the best choice. With that last hardware removed, we can remove the shield. So now let's remove the heat shields for the manifold. So we're going to use a 10mm socket or 10mm gear wrench. And there's 2 pieces. The top piece is secured with 5 bolts, the bottom piece with an additional 2. With the hardware for the top removed, we'll remove the top piece. It won't be reused, nor will its hardware. All right, now we'll remove the bottom shield. Now there's only 1 more bolt holding it on. The second bolt that held it on went through the top piece as well, so it's already been removed. Now this piece is a bit harder to remove. Because we're not reusing it, feel free to bend it in a way that will allow it to be removed, or we can remove it as we tilt the engine later on. But in this case, we're going to just bend it. And now we're ready to remove the manifold. So we're going to remove all of the nuts securing the manifold to the head. There's 7 of them. This car is actually missing 1, so I'll be removing 6. Once we have the manifold unbolted, we will jack up the engine, and that will allow us to remove the manifold. It's a bit of a squeeze, but we'll get it done. To remove the nuts, we're using a 15mm socket. I'm going to alternate a little bit, and I'm going to go to the one at the back. Now the one at the back is a little bit hard to get to. It is possible to get it from the top, and it's also possible to get it from the bottom if you're struggling. So there are a couple options. So the one next to it on the bottom. Now we're missing the one that's in between the number 3 and the number 4 runner at the bottom. So you will have to remove that, but I won't show it. So our last one is the center one here. Now with our manifold fully loose, we're ready to lift the passenger side of the engine, which will aid us in getting the manifold out. So we have a jack. We don't want to point load on the oil pan, which we're going to lift from. So we are using a urethane jack adapter. You could also use a block of wood. We just want to make sure we're not going to puncture the pan. Now we're going to lift until we see the passenger side mount, cast mount, come up off the stud about 1 inch, which is about to the top of the stud. All right, now we'll get the manifold out. It does take quite a bit of maneuvering, so you just got to kind of experiment, take your time, and you'll get it out. And now with the manifold removed, we can remove our old crusty gasket since we have a new one. All right, now that we have our cat removed, you got to decide, are you reusing it? So our kit intends that you either reuse your old cat or you get one of the cats we provide for you, a new cat. So if you're going to reuse it, definitely hold on to it. And if you're not going to reuse it, prepare to recycle. Now with the manifold removed, that wraps up our disassembly, so we can go ahead and lower our engine back down onto its passenger side mount and move on to the next steps. All right, that concludes our first video of our NC Turbo installation series, where we covered the components, the tools, and did our disassembly. So if you have any questions from what you've seen in this video, please feel free to reach out to our customer support team. They'd be happy to help you out. And stay tuned for video 2, where we're going to cover the oil supply and install the turbo. So if you like content like this, don't forget to like it, subscribe to it, and we will see you in our next one.